Most manipulation doesn't look dangerous. In fact, the most effective manipulators rarely raise their voice. They rarely threaten you. And they almost never announce what they're doing. Instead, they make you feel guilty. They make you doubt yourself. They make you question your decisions. And by the time you realize what's happening, you've already been influenced. Today, you'll learn 7 signs someone may be secretly manipulating you. Pay close attention. Because sign number 5 is the one that traps most people without them even realizing it. These signs appear in friendships, relationships, families, workplaces, and sometimes in people you've trusted for years. Let's start with the most common manipulation tactic of all. They make you feel guilty for saying no. Healthy people respect boundaries. Manipulative people often see boundaries as obstacles. When you tell a healthy person no, they may be disappointed. But they usually accept it. A manipulator reacts differently. Instead of respecting your decision, they try to make you feel bad about making it. They may not argue. They may not get angry. Sometimes they sound calm. Sometimes they even sound hurt. But the goal is the same. To make your decision feel wrong. Notice how often manipulators shift the conversation away from the actual request. Instead of discussing what they wanted, they focus on how your refusal made them feel. Suddenly, you're no longer thinking about your own needs. You're thinking about their disappointment, their frustration, their sadness, their sacrifice. And that's exactly where they want your attention. Because guilt is one of the strongest emotional pressures humans experience. Most people dislike feeling selfish. Most people dislike disappointing others. Most people want to be seen as kind. Manipulators understand this. And they use that desire against you. The moment you start making decisions primarily to avoid guilt, you've stopped acting freely. You're acting under emotional pressure. That's why guilt is such an effective tool. It doesn't force people. It persuades them to force themselves. And that's far more powerful. But guilt only works when someone wants your sympathy. The next sign goes even further. Because some manipulators don't just seek sympathy. They build their entire identity around it. They are always the victim. We've all met someone like this. No matter what happens, they're always the injured party. If a project fails, someone sabotaged them. If a relationship ends, they were treated unfairly. If a conflict happens, everyone else was unreasonable. The details change. The story changes. But one thing never changes. They are always the victim. Now, everyone experiences unfair situations sometimes. That's normal. The red flag appears when victimhood becomes permanent. Because permanent victimhood creates a powerful advantage. It protects people from responsibility. If everything is someone else's fault, then nothing needs to change. No self-reflection. No accountability. No growth. And more importantly, it creates sympathy. People naturally want to help those who appear to be suffering. Manipulators know this. That's why some of them unconsciously learn to use suffering as social currency. Every conversation somehow circles back to their struggles. Their pain. Their difficulties. Their bad luck. And before long, you find yourself constantly comforting them. Supporting them. Defending them. Even when they contributed to the very problems they're complaining about. The goal isn't always attention. Sometimes it's protection. Because as long as they remain the victim, they never have to face uncomfortable truths about themselves. And that's where manipulation becomes dangerous. Not because someone is sad. But because sadness becomes a shield against accountability. Quick question. Comment 1 if you've ever been manipulated by guilt. Comment 2 if you only realized it after it was too late. Most people have experienced one of them. They make you doubt your own memory. This is one of the most confusing forms of manipulation. Because it doesn't attack your emotions first. It attacks your confidence. Imagine remembering a conversation clearly. You know what was said. You remember how it happened. But when you bring it up later, the other person responds with complete certainty. That never happened. I never said that. You're remembering it wrong. You're imagining things. At first, you may brush it off. Everyone forgets things occasionally. But when it happens repeatedly, something begins to change. You stop trusting yourself. You start questioning your own memory. Your own judgment. Your own perception of reality. And once that confidence starts to erode, the manipulator gains something incredibly valuable. Control over the narrative. Because if they can convince you to doubt your own experience, they become the authority on what is true. And that's a dangerous position for anyone to hold. And that's exactly why this tactic is so effective. Most people don't notice it immediately. The change happens slowly. One conversation. Then another. Until you find yourself constantly wondering, maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I'm the problem. And that's the real danger. Not the argument itself. But the self-doubt it creates. Because confident people are harder to manipulate. People who trust their own judgment ask questions. They challenge inconsistencies. They notice contradictions. Manipulators don't want that. They want uncertainty. Because uncertainty makes people easier to influence. And once someone begins questioning their own perception more than they question the manipulator's behavior, the balance of power has already shifted. That's why this sign is so important. Not because it creates one bad conversation. But because repeated over time, it changes the way a person sees reality itself. But some manipulators don't attack your confidence. They take a much softer approach. In fact, it often looks like kindness. They use kindness as a weapon. Most acts of kindness are genuine. People help because they care. They support because they want to. And they give without expecting anything in return. But manipulation changes the equation. Because the favor is never really free. At first, everything seems generous. Helpful. Supportive. Even selfless. But later, the favor quietly returns. Not as a gift. As a debt. Suddenly you're reminded of everything they've done for you. Every sacrifice. Every favor. Every act of support. Not because they're grateful. But because they're collecting leverage. And that's the difference. Healthy generosity creates freedom. Manipulative generosity creates obligation. One says, I wanted to help. The other says, now you owe me. The manipulator may never say those exact words. They don't have to. The pressure is implied. And implied pressure is often stronger than direct pressure. Because you create it yourself. You begin feeling guilty. Responsible. Indebted. And before long, you're agreeing to things you never wanted simply because you feel obligated. Not because it's right. Not because it's fair. But because someone turned kindness into a transaction. And that's why this tactic catches so many people. Because it wears the mask of generosity. While secretly serving the goal of control. But the next sign is far more dangerous. Because it doesn't just influence your choices. It changes who you depend on. They make you depend on them. This is the sign most people completely miss. Because dependence rarely appears overnight. It develops slowly. Almost invisibly. At first, the manipulator becomes helpful. reliable, available. They always have advice. They always have answers. They always seem to know what's best. And gradually, something begins to happen. You stop checking with yourself first. You start checking with them. Before making a decision, you want their opinion. Before trusting your instincts, you want their approval. Before taking action, you want their reassurance. And little by little, your confidence starts moving away from you and toward them. That's the goal. Because dependence creates influence. The more someone believes they need you, the easier they become to control. The most effective manipulators don't demand obedience. They create reliance. They position themselves as the source of certainty, the source of confidence, the source of validation. And once that happens, leaving becomes difficult. Not because you're trapped physically, but because you've become emotionally dependent on the person controlling you. And emotional dependence can be one of the strongest forms of control there is. But even dependence isn't enough for some manipulators. The next tactic ensures you'll never feel good enough. They keep moving the goalposts. No matter what you do, it's never enough. You improve. The standard changes. You succeed. The expectation increases. You solve one problem. A new one suddenly appears. And the cycle never ends. At first, it feels like you're making progress. But eventually, you realize something. The finish line keeps moving. That's because the goal was never improvement. The goal was control. As long as approval remains out of reach, you'll keep chasing it. You'll keep trying harder. Working harder. Giving more. Sacrificing more. All in pursuit of validation that never fully arrives. And that's exactly what makes this tactic so exhausting. Because the manipulator isn't rewarding effort. They're using hope as leverage. Keeping you close by making you believe you're always one step away from finally being enough. And when people spend enough time chasing approval, something dangerous happens. They stop asking whether the relationship is healthy. They start asking how they can earn more approval. And that's exactly where manipulation becomes self-sustaining. Because the victim starts participating in their own control. But the final sign may be the easiest to recognize once you know what to look for. Because eventually, every conversation starts revolving around the same person. They make everything about them. At first, it doesn't seem obvious. You share a success. Somehow the conversation becomes about their success. You share a struggle. The conversation shifts toward their struggle. You share an experience. Suddenly they're telling a bigger story about themselves. And while everyone enjoys talking about themselves sometimes, manipulators take it much further. Because attention is power. Attention creates influence. Attention creates importance. And importance creates control. That's why many manipulators instinctively redirect focus back toward themselves. Not once. Not occasionally. Repeatedly. Over time, you may notice something strange. You know a lot about them. But they know surprisingly little about you. They've spent years being heard. Without spending much time listening. And that's a major clue. Because healthy relationships create balance. Both people matter. Both people are heard. Both people have space. Manipulative relationships often create an audience. One person speaks. One person adapts. One person dominates attention. The other slowly disappears. And the longer that pattern continues, the harder it becomes to recognize. Because eventually it feels normal. And that's what makes it so dangerous. Not the obvious moments. The normalized ones. The behaviors that become invisible because you've seen them for too long. Let's quickly review the 7 signs. They make you feel guilty for saying no. They constantly play the victim. They make you question your own memory. They use kindness as a weapon. They create dependence. They keep moving the goalposts. And they make everything about themselves. Notice something important. None of these tactics rely on force. Most manipulation isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It isn't obvious. It's subtle. Gradual. Psychological. And that's exactly why so many people miss it. The biggest misconception about manipulation is that it happens to weak people. It doesn't. Manipulation works on kind people. Empathetic people. Patient people. Trusting people. In fact, many of the qualities that make someone a good friend, a good partner, or a good person can also make them vulnerable to manipulation if boundaries are missing. That's why awareness matters. Not paranoia. Awareness. Because once you recognize the pattern, you regain something powerful. Choice. You stop reacting automatically. You start seeing clearly. And clarity is one of the few things manipulation cannot survive. Which sign do you encounter most often? A. Guilt. B. Playing the victim. C. Making you doubt yourself. D. Weaponized kindness. E. Dependence. F. Moving goalposts. G. Making everything about them. Comment the letter below. And if you've ever escaped a manipulative relationship, comment free. You might inspire someone else to recognize the signs before it's too late.